Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The opinions of hosts and guests do not necessarily reflect the opinion of this network.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. This is Ghost Talk with 187 PI. Sit back and prepare yourselves for an adventure into the paranormal world with host Shelly Robertson and 187 PI research team. Ghost Talk is broadcasting live from Ohio's most haunted jail. Learn about their ongoing research at the jail and abroad, investigation techniques, and their personal encounters. Here is your host of Ghost Talk and 187 PI founder, Shelly Robertson.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Ghost Talk Radio. With me is your host, Shelly Robertson. And tonight I have a very interesting show planned for you. I'm going to be taking you on a journey through some of the most haunted cemeteries in the world. I would like to invite all my listening friends out there tonight to join me in chat at WBHM-DB.com, where you can join in on the conversation or ask me any questions you might have. Now, I would like to mention before we start our journey, many of the locations we will be visiting tonight are places you can actually go to. And I would like to add that most cemeteries are closed to the public after dark, and even some high-profile cemeteries you can only enter with a tour guide. So please, if you want to visit these places, get permission from the local management if you would like to visit after dark, as trespassing is against the law. Now, for some people, just the mere mention of the word cemetery, it makes people feel uneasy or gives them creepy thoughts. But for me, I find them a very calming and relaxing place. I mean, that's how a cemetery should feel, right? I mean, if that's where you're gonna lay yourself down for the rest of eternity, right? I actually like to visit them. And some of the really older cemeteries, they're very, very fascinating to me. Some people might say that cemeteries are not haunted, but I can assure you that indeed some of them, in fact, are very haunted. I have firsthand experiences to attest that cemeteries can, and they most definitely are, haunted. And that just goes to show that I don't believe that necessarily that all ghosts are here due to unfinished business or a tragic event. I think that sometimes they can choose to be here and they wander around where they want to go. That's what I think some of the hauntings are all about. So now let's visit some of the most haunted cemeteries in the world, shall we? The first stop on our journey tonight is Highgate Cemetery in North London, England. Highgate Cemetery is one of the most haunted places in London, and with good reason, folks. In the early 1800s, the city's population topped the 1 million mark, and despite the high death rate, it was still growing. Graves were crammed between shops and outside taverns. I mean, you name it, that's what was happening, right? Undertakers were dressed as clergymen and they performed illegal ceremonies. Many people were buried in shallow graves and quickly covered with lime. And you can imagine the stench and disease were horrific. Well, because of all of this, Parliament decided that 7 private cemeteries would be built in the countryside of London, and they were known as the Magnificent Seven. The third cemetery, dated in 1839, that was Highgate. The architect and builder turned Highgate into an eternal oasis of peace and tranquility, right? Everybody who was anybody wanted to be buried there. So, by 1854, the place was packed, and they had to buy another 20 adjoining acres, okay? So this is pretty astonishing. There is approximately 170,000 people buried in around 53,000 graves spanning over 37 acres in the Highgate Cemetery. And this cemetery is notable both for some of the people buried there as well as its status as a nature reserve. See, today it's just a beautiful place. And the cemetery is actually on the Register of Historic Parks and Gardens. On Monday, May 20th, 1839, Highgate Cemetery was dedicated to St. James by the Right Reverend Charles James Blomfield, Lord Bishop of London. 15 acres were consecrated for the use of the Church of England. Now, Highgate, like the others of the Magnificent Seven, soon became a fashionable place for burials and was a much admired place to visit, right? The Victorian attitude to the death and its presentation led to the creation of a wealth of Gothic tombs and buildings. So some of them are just so fabulous and fancy, right? The cemetery's grounds, they were full of trees and shrubbery and wildflowers, and most of which had been planted and grown without human influence. The grounds were a haven for birds and small animals such as foxes and you name it. It was a very happy place for lots of wildlife. Now, because of Karl Marx Association, right, a variety of socialist leaders and thinkers are also buried within the cemetery grounds. By the turn of the 20th century, the cemetery's fortunes waned, and World War I decimated the staff. And by the end of World War II, the cemetery had all but been abandoned. In 1960, the gates to the Highgate Cemetery were closed. Pristine landscaping became lush jungles, and buildings were starting to tumble in on themselves. Now, studios used the grounds to shoot horror movies, and then the rumors and rituals began. Stories of men dressed in dark robes practicing dark rituals surfaced. Ghosts and ghouls haunted the alleyways around the graveyard. People reported seeing red-eyed demons staring at them through the fence even. And then, believe it or not, folks, then there was the Highgate vampire. That's right, you heard me correctly, a vampire. The vampire was said to be a medieval nobleman who practiced black magic in Romania. His coffin was brought from Europe to England in the 18th century, and his cult-like followers bought him a house in the West End. He was buried at the site that eventually became Highgate Cemetery. And of course, he slumbered peacefully until, according to reports, Satanists performed a ritual at the cemetery and woke him up. The Highgate vampire is said to be a tall, dark figure that glides through the cemetery. His presence is frequently announced by a sudden drop in temperature. He has also caused clocks and watches to stop. He terrifies all the animals in his vicinity, and he's been blamed for scores of dead foxes on the cemetery grounds. They've been dead, seemingly drained of their blood. Now, the Highgate vampire, he has a hypnotic stare and a bone-chilling effect on all who have encountered him, especially those who are foolish enough to spend the night in the cemetery. The Highgate vampire is just the tip of the supernatural iceberg. The problems with the dead, they started during the Victorian times with exploding coffins. That's right, folks, exploding coffins. Now, Highgate Cemetery, they had a series of tombs built for those who wanted to be buried above ground. And quite honestly, I would like to have one of those. Regulations at the time, they required the tombs to be encased in lead to prevent, this is disgusting, but I got to tell it to you, leaking out, right? The body fluids and stuff. Now, as the bodies decomposed in their hermetically sealed tombs, the buildup of gases caused some of the coffins to explode. Now, the solution was to drill a small hole in the coffin, place a pipe in it, and then light a match so the gases could burn off hygienically, right? Now, although the cemetery is done burning off gases, there are still problems, including heart-stopping banshee wails. Believe that. Spectral faces that float around in the graveyard. There's this ghostly cyclist who wanders the grounds, and there has also been spotted a floating ghost of a nun. Some spirits are such regular visitors that locals have even named them, so there's names for them now. Now, this place, it continues to be a popular place for enthusiasts of the occult, paranormal, and of course, it draws folks in that think they are a vampire. And it also hosts the graves of some of history's most well-known figures, including Karl Marx, Malcolm McLaren, and the singer, which I was very fond of, George Michael. Next on our journey, it will take us to the St. Louis Cemetery number 1 in New Orleans. And I would like to visit this place. I really would, because all the photographs and everything is just fabulous, and it's been in a couple of movies, and I want to go visit it. New Orleans, that is the oldest gravesite, cemetery number 1. And it was established by Spanish royal decree on August 14th, 1789, right? It remains the oldest cemetery that locals and tourists alike can visit. It's also considered one of the most haunted cemeteries in all of the United States. It spans over, it's got 700 tombs, and there is over 100,000 of the dead and counting, because it's still an active gravesite. And as you can imagine, it's no surprise that it's been reported to be very haunted. Now, for over 200 years, there have been reports of people having run-ins with the ghost, which call St. Louis Cemetery number 1 their home, right? And many of the family tombs there, they bear cryptic symbols as well as signs of vandalism, unfortunately, and signs of old age. So it's no wonder that many people feel a ghastly presence when visiting New Orleans' oldest cemetery. And it's no wonder that many movie productions practically just fall over themselves to get the film within the cemetery walls, right? It was the most famous films shot inside there were Easy Rider and Interview with a Vampire. So, of course, you would imagine that's a perfect vampire setting, right? Now, the cemetery, it's earned a nickname, and it's The Cities of the Dead, and the famed author Mark Twain gave that cemetery that name, and to this date, no other appropriate name's ever been given. So it's known as the Cities of the Dead. And you might be wondering, if you don't already know, who haunts the St. Louis Cemetery number 1? Well, some more things that are so darn interesting to me that I would like to go check out in New Orleans. There's several ghosts that have been reported to have haunting this cemetery. And the most famous ghost that's seen within this cemetery is that of Marie Laveau, commonly known as the Voodoo Queen. Marie was born in 1801 and would become the most loved and at times feared voodoo practitioner in New Orleans history. She practiced fortune-telling, the occult, and worked with herbal remedies. As awareness of Marie's skills and power spread throughout the population, her fame grew and gained unimaginable strength, as you can imagine, right? Legend has it that she knew all of the secrets of all the levels of society, and no doubt she did, as hordes of people would just clamor and flock to visit her and beg her for help with their problems or to assist them in their own rituals and spells. She was quite literally, folks, the go-to voodoo practitioner in New Orleans during the 19th century. Now, the ghost of Marie Laveau has been spotted in many locations throughout the French Quarter, including wandering down the street past her old house at 1022 St. Anne Street. She's most recognized by her red and white turban tucked around her hair and by the brilliantly colored clothes she wears. But even as people follow her, she disappears and vanishes right in plain sight. There 1 second, poof, gone. Within the cemetery, individuals have reported seeing the ghost of Marie Laveau walking through the tombs. And for those willing and risking to disregard her beliefs or her religion, reports exist of people being scratched, pinched, or actually shoved down onto the ground. Marie, as they say, is not always deemed the friendly of spirits, right? And perhaps the most interesting of all is the practice of marking the tomb of Marie Laveau with 3 X's while asking her for a favor or making a wish. Now, legend has it, and truly this is just legend, has it that if the wish is granted, the person is required to return and place a gift at the site of her tomb. Unfortunately, this has led to a lot of vandalism, including 2 instances where the entire tomb was painted a Pepto-Bismol pink. Very bad, very bad. And the result of this was the Archdiocese of New Orleans closed the cemetery off to the general public after March 2015. And today, only people on licensed tours may proceed inside. So you have to get a ticket now and be guided on in. Even the change in policy has not stopped guests from experiencing something otherworldly at Marie Laveau's tomb. Visitors have reported all sites of paranormal happenings while trying to interact with the now deceased Voodoo Queen. Feelings of being touched, becoming unexplainably ill, and hearing voices emanating from inside the tomb have all been said to happen on occasion. So if you do visit this tomb, I want to warn you all, it's considered vandalism to leave any mark on Marie Laveau's tomb. So don't do it, folks. Don't do it. Other ghosts of St. Louis Cemetery number 1 is the spirit of Henry Vines. The story of Henry Vines is a tragically sad one. He was a sailor during the 19th century, and Henry Vines, he had no true home to speak of. He was a nomad. He traveled here and he traveled there, sailing on the high seas. And in New Orleans, he made his home at a local boarding house, but he was constantly worried about his important papers while away from the city. So much so that before departing on another voyage, he asked the owner of the boarding house to keep his papers if he died, and these papers included his family tombs. And with that, we'll have to take a short break. You're listening to Ghost Talk Radio on WBHM-DB.com.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama. Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the World Wide Web of Weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to Ghost Talk Radio with me as your host, Shelly Robertson. And tonight, I am talking about the most haunted cemeteries in the world. If you missed the first part of the show, no worries. You can catch the full show archive at your leisure on Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio. Actually, if you have a subscription somewhere, I'm sure we're there. Right before the break, we're talking about this St. Louis Cemetery number 1, which is in New Orleans, okay? And I had just told all about Marie Laveau's haunting, and we're talking about this fella named Henry Vines, how he left his lovely paperwork and stuff with a boarding house that he was staying at. And the owner of this boarding house promised Henry that all would be good and he had nothing to worry about. And this lady, upon his departure, she sold Henry's family tomb. He discovered her treachery when he returned from sea to New Orleans, and poor Henry, he was never able to rectify the problem legally or on his own. So, shortly after his return, he fell ill and he died. But as his tomb been sold, there was no money to build another. Henry's body was then buried in an unmarked grave in the paupers section of the St. Louis Cemetery No. 1. And although his body was laid to rest over a century ago, the ghost of Henry Vines is still seen wandering the cemetery. He is described as being tall, with blue eyes, and he comes up to visitors at the cemetery and asks them if they know where the Vines tomb is located, because he's having trouble finding it himself. And then he disappears. His ghost has even turned up to funerals, appearing behind the grieving family to ask if there might be any more room in the tomb for him. His apparition's been caught on camera, and so has the distinct sound of a male's voice on an EVP saying, "I need to rest." For the ghost of Henry Vines, I don't think rest is going to be in his future unless somebody helps him along into that tomb. Then we have the lost ghost of Alphonse, who roams the pathways of the cemetery in search of a final resting place as well. He's been known to take guests' hands and pull them till the people stop, and he smiles at them and he asks them to bring him home. He also has a knack for gathering flowers off of freshly spruced up graves and placing them on his own forgotten tomb. There have been reported sightings of ghostly cats and dogs roaming the cemetery that just vanish into thin air. There have been so many reports of paranormal activity in this cemetery. You name it, it's been reported. Many EVP and pictures of apparitions has also been captured at this cemetery, okay? And the next place we're going to stop at is the Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, Scotland. And this is the most haunted cemetery in Scotland. And some people would say the most haunted cemetery in the world, with over 500 paranormal ghost attacks having been reported since 1998. So the story goes. There was this homeless man who was supposed to have disturbed the slumbering soul of Lord Advocate Sir George Mackenzie, known as Bloody Mackenzie by his victims. Okay. Historians state that Sir George Mackenzie was a monster in the guise of a human when he judged that they judged by his actions throughout his life. So they think he's a monster. And he is responsible for 18,000 people who died by his order. He was said to be so very educated and masterfully skilled at hiding his monstrous side that even his wife and family didn't truly know who he was. Mackenzie was also speculated to have written the first novel from Scotland. Originally, Greyfriars Kirkyard was a prison which became the burial grounds for most of his prisoners as they were tortured to death after being imprisoned. It is recorded that he died in 1691, and he was buried in a black mausoleum just a few feet from where his victims were buried in the Greyfriars Kirkyard. Now, to understand why George Mackenzie was called Bloody Mackenzie, we first need to understand the crimes he committed for enforcing the king's religion on his countrymen, whether they liked it or not, okay? King Charles II had ascended the throne in the 17th century, where he swiftly revoked the right of the Covenanters to follow any other religion but the state religion, which was met with strong opposition, right? Now, this led the king to appoint Lord Advocate Sir George Mackenzie to make the rebel Presbyterian Covenanters accept the new religion he wanted Great Britain to follow, okay? But since the Covenanters were unwilling to part with their religion, a bloody and violent battle was fought June 22nd, 1679. The battle was later known as the Bothwell Bridge, where the Presbyterian Covenanters, they were defeated swiftly, leading many to be captured as prisoners to be sent to Greyfriars Kirkyard, right? So, here in the cold, damp, and dark prison, many, if not most prisoners, they were subjected to tortures, and they were even withheld even your most basic human rights, okay? So it was just horrific. The captives who died in prison, and they were also buried there under the care of George Mackenzie. That's how he got the nickname Bloody Mackenzie. Okay, so now we're going to fast forward a few years because this was way back in the 1600s, right? So we're going to fast forward up to 1998. And it's said that this homeless man decided to break into the tomb of Mackenzie. He was homeless and he was looking for antiques and whatnot or something he could sell. Unfortunately for the homeless man, while he was trying to get to the coffin, the floor of the vault gave way under him and he fell right into a pit of bodies from victims of a long forgotten plague. Holy smoke, right? Now, the homeless man was then found screaming in terror while he escaped the cemetery and into the woods, and he was never seen again. As you can imagine, if that were me, I would never be seen again either. So, once the poltergeist of Mackenzie was awakened, it found other victims soon after, like a lady who heard of the break-in and decided to take a look herself. She was said to have been standing on the steps of the tomb where she was sent flying by an unknown force. And that's not all. Another woman soon after the first incident was found unconscious near the tomb with markings and bruises on her neck, indicating someone or something tried to strangle her to death. Now, after these events, the Mackenzie poltergeist became famous through the internet, with people coming from around the world to see if the stories and rumors about the ghost were true. Unfortunately, many visitors found out firsthand the reality of the situation when they found themselves being attacked and hurt without explanation. There is even photographic evidence that has many convinced of the spirit's existence. Over 500 attacks by the poltergeist have been reported with injuries ranging from unexplained burns, gouges to the abdominal area and neck, as well as many broken bones in the fingers. There's also been women who have stated that they felt themselves being paralyzed for a moment because their hair is being pulled downward, like their hair is being jerked down. And, that's not all. The story isn't over. There was an account of an exorcist that visited the haunted site as well. In the year 2000, this fellow named Colin Grant, who was an exorcist, he followed ghost hunters to Greyfriars Kirkyard, where he was set to exorcise the poltergeist of Mackenzie. Now, after starting to perform the exorcism in Kirkyard, he soon stopped the exorcism, and he immediately left the graveyard, stating that he feared for his life when he felt surrounded by hundreds of evil spirits and tormented souls. And while this may not be surprising to some of you who may not believe in exorcism, you should find this shocking, that Grant died a month later due to sudden and unexplainable heart attack. And the activity is said to continue on to this day in that cemetery. So, do you dare to venture in? I don't know. Maybe if you want to get beat up. I'm going to say maybe I'll pass on that one. Our next stop on this journey is the Old Burying Point in Salem, Massachusetts. Now, the Old Burying Point Cemetery, also known as Charter Street Cemetery, is the oldest cemetery in Salem and among the oldest in the United States. I think there's only one cemetery older than this one in the United States. And this cemetery opened in 1637, and it's the final resting place for several Salem notables. Now, perhaps one of the most notable individuals interred within the Old Burying Point is Jonathan Hawthorne. Hawthorne is best known and remembered as being a judge during the infamous witch trials. During this time, he gained his own notoriety for his involvement in the sentencing of supposed witches. This was to earn him the nickname the Hanging Judge. Interestingly, Judge Jonathan Hawthorne is actually rumored to be one of the spirits said to haunt the Old Burying Point Cemetery. His apparition is supposedly cited so commonly that it has also shown up in a number of photographs that have been snapped within this spooky place, right? So there's lots of photographs out there of him. In addition to Hawthorne's ghost making itself known, plenty other reports of strange activity have managed to make their way out of that cemetery due to the fact that it was considered unlawful and unlucky, get this folks, to touch the corpse of a witch. Their deceased bodies were unceremoniously dumped around the grounds of the Old Burying Point, and therefore they did not get a proper burial. It is believed the lost spirits of these poor souls show up at the cemetery, as there's been multiple reports of voices, strange anomalies, odd orbs of light, and sudden drops of temperature while walking through the grounds. And if some of those witches are haunting the grounds of the Old Burying Point Cemetery, perhaps their only reason for doing so is to forever torment their killer, Judge John Hawthorne. Now, strangely, the hauntings from those buried within the old cemetery have even spread to neighboring residences. This place called Murphy's Pub, which sits directly next door to the Old Burying Point, is said to have had some wandering spirits from the cemetery make their way through the property. So, there's just spirits wandering all around there. Our next stop on this tour will be the Old Jewish Cemetery in Prague, Czech Republic. Now, the Old Jewish Cemetery is an important historical monument of Prague's Jewish town, which is situated in the Old Town district in the historical center of Prague, and it's just a few meters from the Old Town Square. It's considered one of the oldest cemeteries in the world, and it was founded in the mid-15th century with the purpose of replacing the cemetery in the new town, right? The oldest tombstone there is that it was dated in 1439, and it's of a rabbi. And the very last, most recent grave that is at the cemetery was in 1787. Now, the cemetery was abolished by Emperor Joseph II, who forbid people from burying the dead inside the city center for sanitary reasons. Now, visitors can see, this is so crazy, folks. They can see 12,000 tombstones, all right, and 400,000 ritually buried remains, okay? Let me tell you how this goes. The Prague Jews were not allowed to be buried outside of the ghetto, and that's what they called their area where they were living. And the Jewish faith doesn't permit moving the dead, so the deceased there are buried in as many as 12 layers, okay? Like stacked upon stacked upon stacked. It would be like more dirt would be piled up on each grave, and another layer would be added so another person could be buried on top of the other person, right? So this is just mind-boggling. And I guess and they couldn't move the headstones either. So there's all of these headstones are just cram-packed as well. I guess it's a sight to behold, right? And the cemetery is reported to be in one of the most haunted cemeteries, right? There's photos of apparitions and ghostly images have been captured, as well as strange light anomalies have been seen, right? How bizarre to have so many in such a small area, right? No wonder it's haunted. So next place we're going to go to is in Paris, France, to the Père-Lachaise Cemetery, and it opened in 1804, and it's one of the largest and most visited cemeteries in Paris. There's about 1 million people buried within the walls of this cemetery, and along some of its, tree-lined paths, some of the most influential writers and painters and musicians and politicians are buried in this here cemetery. Paranormal activity has been reported in various sections of the cemetery. Some of the activity is believed to have originated from some particularly interesting burials. And with that, folks, we have to take a short break. We will be back after this short break. You're listening to Ghost Talk Radio on WBHM-DB.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
This is Jason Bland, host of Midwest Paranormal Presents Paranormal Soup, where we stream live as a webcast every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern, with guests who will blow your mind. Live ghost box sessions where you can call into the show to see if the spirits will talk to you, and the world wide web of weird with the latest in paranormal news and evidence. We're bringing the weird every Sunday night, 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Eastern on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow and subscribe.
You You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 45 minutes after the hour.
Welcome back to Ghost Talk Radio with me as your host, Shelly Robertson, and tonight I'm talking about some of the most haunted cemeteries in the world. If you missed the first part of the show, no worries. You can listen to this full show archive on Spreaker, Google Play, iTunes, iHeartRadio, and many, many, many other places. If you have a subscription wherever you're at, we're probably there. Prior to the break, I'm taking you to Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, and we were just about getting to the first ghost story in that cemetery, which is, it's the largest cemetery in Paris, right? And it surrounds, this first story, it surrounds a former prime minister's place of rest, right? Adolphe Thiers. And he was in power of Paris in the 19th century. And today, it's believed that he haunts his own tomb. Many people allegedly claim to feel the sensation of having their clothing tugged on when walking past his mausoleum. And this is believed to be Mr. Thiers making his presence known, right? And not too far away is the famous author Marcel Proust, his burial place. And Marcel has a well-kept grave where there is this symbolic love heart shape. It's made out of discarded chestnuts. It's on top of his grave. And this ties into his tragic ghost story in kind of a fitting way. It's believed that each night Marcel's ghost rises from its grave in search of his lost lover. Unfortunately, of course, he never actually manages to find his lover, who was buried at a separate cemetery against their wishes. And you'll find this very interesting, folks. Our final ghost story relating to this particular cemetery relates to the most well-known and visited grave within Père Lachaise Cemetery, and that is of Jim Morrison, the lead singer of The Doors. There's been multiple sightings of Jim roaming the cemetery, particularly around the area where he was buried. Some have even claimed to have captured his apparition in a photograph. Isn't that interesting? Now, we have this next stop we're going to go to is the Old Western Burial Ground, and that is in Baltimore, Maryland. All right, and this place, it opened in 1849, and the Old Western Burial Ground in Baltimore is the final resting place of many famous people, including 15 generals from the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812, and, get this, Edgar Allan Poe. It is one of the scariest places in America where Poe's ghost has been spotted. And there's another story about the Cambridge skull, okay? There was this minister who was murdered, but allegedly, even after his death, his head never stopped screaming. Yes, it was screaming, folks. Murderers finally silenced the skull. They buried it in a block of cement. And it is said his voice can still be heard. And if anyone hears it, that person will never get that sound out of their head. And it is said, legend, that it will drive you insane. So I don't know if I actually want to come in contact with the screaming skull. And this last one we're going to touch briefly that I'm going to talk about is the witch's graveyard. And it's nestled within the mountains away from Brotherton Mountain Road in Tennessee and is the Stamps Cemetery, which is known by its nickname, right? The witch's graveyard, because of just like the tent-like rock slabs where the body is buried, headstones with stars, pentagrams, or strange marks, etc. The local explanations, like the fella, Mr. Stamps, who used the pentagram instead of the X to sign his name, and similar folklore, don't really explain the random animal sacrifices that are found on the grounds at this here cemetery. All kinds of paranormal activity has been reported at this cemetery. Apparitions have been seen, screeching, wailing voices have been heard, and you just never know. You just never know. Is it the makings from a real witch, or just from maybe rituals that happened on the land? I don't know. And now let's talk a little bit about what's going on here at the Old Paulding Jail. Tomorrow night we have Chris Fleming, who will be there for a ghost hunt, and that is a sold-out show, folks. So if you didn't get a chance to get your ticket for that, maybe next time around. And then we have Halloween night, Saturday, October 31st. We have All Hallows Eve ghost hunt led by me and my team at the Old Paulding Jail. We still do have a few tickets available for that, and if you'd like to attend, you can find the tickets either on our Facebook page or at 187pi.com under events. And what's interesting about this hunt, and we want to do some experiments and test some of the legends, because this one is kind of special, as this is the second moon in October, full moon, and it is actually the blue moon, which the blue moon only comes around in October once every 3 years, and it's supposed to be extra thin veil for the ghost hunting, for paranormal activity. So we are going to test this out and see if our activity heightened. And actually, I'll tell you, this month, as the month has been dwindling down, and I don't know if it has anything to do with the 2 full moons this month, but paranormal activity has been up at the jail this month quite a lot. After that, folks, we have got a few private investigations left available, and a few more are going to be listed for the year, but they're weekdays. There's no more weekends available, folks. Then we have in February Santiago Cirillo, who was on The Walking Dead. He was on the paranormal movie Rosalie, and oh my gosh, she's just been in so many things. He is going to be at the jail this coming February. First 2 weekends, actually, for some ghost hunts, and he's going to take part in our escape games. There will be a meet and greet. He is planning a new TV series called Smoke. It's a paranormal show, and he is planning on having locals fill some of the acting roles. So if you are interested in being in a TV series, a paranormal TV series, now this is scripted, it's not a reality. At least come to his meet and greet. And it's going to be a fun time. It's going to be really interesting. They call him a paranormal magnet. He's made a visit to the jail, and we had activity while he was there. So you'll want to check that out at our website, 187pi.com, and that's coming up in February. And now I would like to let you all know what's going on here at our fabulous network, WBHM-DB. We have some fantastic show by some amazing hosts, and let me tell you, they all have some very interesting guests. And a lot of our shows are at 8 p.m. Eastern or later, and Sunday nights we have Fate Mag Radio with show host Kat Hobson. Monday nights we have Paranormal Pride Show with host Denise Pridemore. Wednesday nights we have Paranormal Experience Show with host Kat Hobson. We've also added a couple of more shows to the lineup, and you can read all about them and the show hosts at the network's website, WBHM-DB.com. And if you got something, some free time in the evenings, you're winding down from work, that's what you can do. You can listen to some fantastic shows and content. Now, I want to take a brief moment to thank everyone for listening to tonight's live broadcast. And I want everyone to remember to be kind and be positive. What you put out there is positivity. It's going to help the world we live in right now. I want to wish everyone a great evening and a very happy weekend. Keep safe. Good night, friends.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.